Really Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hi, it's Doc Frank, and today I'm very pleased to present you a previous guest of my podcast again, Teeshal Bal, a revenue manager and a leadership coach from Melbourne in Australia. Previous episodes with Teeshal were episode 28, just with her, and then some parts of it in a mixed leadership episode that was number 44. Links in the show notes. The conversation is quite wide-ranging and includes how to transition a railway organization to new technology and new ways of operating, how to make the world a better place, what is mind engineering, initiatives to foster the role of women in the railway workforce, the importance of gratitude and living in the present, and much more. Please enjoy. This is Doc Frank. Really quick before we start the conversation, I want to give you a quick insight in a new training that was developed just earlier this year. It is called High Capacity Signaling Blueprint. High capacity signaling is not just what they're doing in Melbourne, which today's episode is about, but they're also doing it in many other places where higher signaling capacity is needed and also required to make a business case for new technology. The training course explains what high capacity signaling is. Then it looks at how it can be achieved with communications-based train control, CBTC. We look at how high capacity signaling can be achieved with enhanced varieties of ETCS, the European Train Control System. And then lastly, how CBTC or ETCS need to be applied to get to real high capacity signaling in practice. You basically have 3 training courses in one. You now have a special offer for the end of the year as a listener to this podcast. If you go to docfranktraining.podia.com/HCS Blueprint and you use podcast 23 at checkout, you get a 23% discount for this training, which is unique in the world. So again, it's docfranktraining.podia.com/HCS Blueprint and take checkout code podcast 23. Hope to see you in the training. And now please enjoy my conversation with Teeshal. Teeshal, welcome back to the show.
No, thank you for having me for the second time. I might have made some sort of impression for you to call me back, Doc.
You actually did, and in a very intriguing way, I would say. Obviously, I like all the guests on my podcast. Otherwise, I wouldn't take them on in the first place. So I'm quite selective who I get on the show. And I think I have pretty good relationships with all of them. I like the conversations with everybody and so on. But your case was somewhat special, without wanting to elevate you too much about the other guests, because that would make putting them down, which I really don't want to do. But the conversation with you was one of the ones that fascinated me most. Maybe because it was so multifaceted, because it was not just about the railway industry, but it was such a nice mix of railway industry, and then we were talking about mail distribution, and we were talking about virtual reality in leadership training, and then of course there was you as a personality, which brings a very strong, say, human element to the entire conversation, and I found this really intriguing. And literally like 5 minutes after the podcast with you, I thought there needs to be a repeat. Yeah, there needs to be a follow up, and that's the reason why you're on. And I think objectively, even we have something new to talk about because you have assumed a new role very recently. So maybe you just start out talking a bit what has changed in your professional life most recently, and then hopefully we come to the other aspects of your life a bit later on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think first and foremost, thank you so very much for having me back again. I am very humbled, and I really hope to actually add more value to your audience. Um, wow. Okay. So lots has happened. 2023 has been a pretty big year for me. So since the last catch up, I've changed roles. I'm still with Metro Trains and being part of this organization. But in the last 6 weeks, I've taken on a role as head of Metro Tunnel Transition Office. Along that, I am still a board director for one of our alliances, delivering about $1.2 billion worth of level crossing works. So still carrying or wearing two hats, if you like, in terms of the corporate space. It's a really exciting role. I didn't realize how enormous it was. I remember having the conversation with my current project director. He was telling me about this exciting Metro Tunnel project. Everybody wants to be part of it. I'm like, yes. And I was like, yeah, but you've been working the last 7 years in the build and construction of this project. And he's like, yes, but now we need to shift our minds into transition for day one. Like, are we ready? And that's literally what the role is. It's to bring everyone within the business, and Metro is huge, right? We've got about 7,500 employees. We've got various business units, and everyone needs to make sure everyone's actually on the same page when it comes to being ready for day one. That's literally what the role entails. I'm making it sound probably a lot simpler than what it is, but that's essentially the role.
Yeah, I think the Metro Tunnel project is somewhat special. On the one hand, it looks just like any other network extension, like you have a railway line going to one place and then you extend it by another, like I don't know, South Morang to Mernda or something like that. But it's different. It's different because of the underground tunnel aspect. It's different because of the interfaces to other parts of the network, and it's of course different because of the high capacity signaling and the high capacity metro trains. So it's not just a network extension. It's really a transformation to almost a different type of railway and a different type of operation, at least in some parts of the network, which are affected by the tunnel. And from a transitioning viewpoint, I'm very pleased that MTM as the operator starts early enough, because the tunnel is meant to be open in 2025, if that's still the schedule. And so that means that gives you probably at least 18 months to focus on that transition and to structure and organize that transition, which seems a decent amount of time for something like that. But maybe you can talk a bit about the status of the transition. I don't think the transition thought and concept will have started on day one of your appointment. I think there was already something there. And maybe you can talk a bit about the situation that you found yourself in when you started this new role.
Yeah, great question. Yes, I think the idea behind it is in the last, the whole project is still one project. It's focused on the Metro Tunnel project, but it's got two focus areas. So one is tunnel delivery. We need to make sure we actually complete the construction, the commissioning of the tunnel itself. And you're very right. Like, we've got 5 brand new underground train stations, twin tunnel rail system, implementation of the CBTC, new HCMTs coming through, a brand new timetable as well that will actually improve how Melbournians actually move. So this is actually a pretty big piece for Melbourne, because it's new and novel to us, not necessarily new and novel to the world, because there's a lot of other similar type projects that have been undertaken, but I guess the way that we're actually carrying this out is novel. And the focus has actually been more on with the new timetable change, are we ready from an operational and from a reliability perspective as well? There's a lot of preparedness that needs to be undertaken before we actually open for day one. So that's why the emphasis of the role is really just to bring together And I almost look at it as 5 pillars, right? Like from a people perspective, everything's going to change. Like, do we have enough people to actually run the network come day one? But it's not just the people in terms of train drivers. What about our operational sort of staff? How would our current business operate with the new tunnel in place? There's a lot to actually be talked through from that aspect, just from a people mobilization perspective. Then the next pillar is really around finance and commercial. Our franchise agreement will also change in the way we actually operate. That's the second thing. From our contracts, suppliers, Schedule 3 and how we actually maintain the railway, all of that will change as well. Thirdly is really looking at from a safety and accreditation perspective. We all know on any big projects out there, you will not get 100% of all your activities really done for day one. There will be some form of residual risk in any project, but are we ready for day one in terms of that? What does that actually look like? Have we got the right mitigations in place? The fourth pillar is really around operability. So the thing that's a bit unique about the Metro Tunnel project is not just the project itself, but there's a lot of interdependency projects. So for example, stabling of trains is a separate project, making sure that our software is all updated for day one. And that's really in the OCMS in terms of technology. I think we worked out there's probably around 70 projects outside of the tunnel project alone that has an interdependency for day one. So it's making sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to that. And the last one is really around reliability. So we've got fault management, we've got maintenance and renewals. So it's really looking at hypercare as well, right? And I've got a great colleague who's also come on board as head of hypercare, and he's looking after that. So making sure that we've got enough care in place post day one for at least 6 months to make sure Melbourne's actually ready for this new service. So that's effectively the 5 pillars that we kind of oversee within the Metro Tunnel Transition Office.
Mm, mm. Did you come up with those 5 pillars, or is that something that was already there, which you kind of picked up and said, okay, well, that's my understanding of the scope, or that's the scope that I've been given?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't actually there. I did look at it, thinking. We had the pleasure of having some really experts from MTR Elizabeth Line in London that came down and paid us a bit of a visit. Richard Schofield. So it was really great meeting him and picking his brain as well as to what worked, what didn't work well with the MTR Elizabeth Line in London. And based on some of the things that he shared with me, I was trying to picture in my mind, like, how do we actually report and provide the right lens on this project? And that's when the 5 pillars was actually born, and I bounced the ideas off with the executives and with the directors of the organization, and they liked the sound of it because I said, Eddie, ultimately we'll want to know if there was any delays that was going to come through or any risk or issues, they would stem from one of these 5 pillars, and that just made it easier for us to focus our attention in the right place as opposed to actually going down into the granular sort of detail.
Yeah. 5 is a good number. Very, very often the magical number is 3, but it probably wouldn't quite fit the enormous complexity of this project that you mentioned. Yeah. So I would be hard pressed to say, well, how can you do it less than 5? On the other hand, if you spread it out any further, if you make it more than 5, then it probably becomes too complex for management to follow. Yeah. So I think 5 is probably a good compromise there. And of course, the other thing you said, the lessons learned from your MTR colleague from London is also very, very valuable to, as you said, Melbourne is not the first city in the world who have done something like this, even though you can certainly find aspects where you say, well, yeah, but this is different than there, and that is different than elsewhere, and so on. So you can probably construct it in a way that you say, this project is unique. And from some kind of perspective, every project is unique if you construct it carefully enough. But on the other hand, there are certainly lots of similarities with other projects around the world. So introducing a new piece of railway is certainly not entirely new. And I think what London has recently done with Crossrail, which is now called the Elizabeth Line, is probably very, very comparable with what Melbourne is doing. And if anything, the complexity in London was rather higher than it is in Melbourne. So you can't really say, no, this is not, Melbourne is more or better or bigger or whatever. So
And I think that's been the great benefit with Metro Trains, leveraging the lessons learned from other cities. We're doing the same with MTS in Sydney as well. Why reinvent the wheel if other cities have already done it, learn from their mistakes so that we do a bit better?
yeah, yeah, and I think it's good that you mentioned MTS in Sydney, Metro Train Sydney, because I think there are lessons to be learned there as well. I mean, you could dismiss it and saying, yeah, but it's different. Sydney Metro is a completely different organization with a dedicated network, and everything is driverless. Whereas here in Melbourne, one, we are not driverless. Two, it's just a small part of a wider network where everything is integrated. So you could pick on all the differences and then basically dismiss the Sydney experience, or you could focus on the similarities and said, okay, well, where are the aspects where we can learn from Sydney, which for some Melburnians may be a foreign concept in the first place to learn anything from Sydney, because very often you know about the competitiveness between the two cities. Very often Sydney is just taken, if anything, as a bad example, like in Melbourne we want to do it differently or better or but different in any case different.
No, you're not going to get any arguments from me in relation to that. I was pretty happy to actually learn from them. I think that'll make my life a little bit easier.
Yeah. I mean, learning from others requires also a bit of humility, I think. The humility not to claim that you know everything best, which is related to your own network, to your own railway, especially if there are so many new aspects. So I think what makes metro tunnels so special in Melbourne is that on the one hand, it's an integrated part of the network. On the other hand, it's quite different with regards to the technology used, with regards to some of the operational concepts that, at least in the tunnel or in the CBTC areas, you've got automatic train operation, which you don't have in the rest of the Melbourne network. So it's really a bit like a railway inside a railway. I don't know how to put it any better. And I think it's probably an interesting juggle for Metro Trains Melbourne to bring this together, whether you treat it as a completely separate island within the rest of the network, which is still running the old way, or how you can actually integrate this. How you can have, for example, train drivers that drive on the Dandenong Sunshine Corridor or Sunbury Corridor, but also in the rest of the network. So they can basically do both. And doing both, or the ability to do both, will probably be even more important in the future when wider parts of Melbourne transition to high capacity signaling, whatever that means in the future, maybe something different from the metro tunnel. But the transformation of the rail operations in Melbourne is due to continue and to spread out and to widen. So integrating this, I think, will be the right way forward, but also what may be the more difficult and complicated way in the short term.
I think anything worthwhile always takes time, but it's always worthwhile. So I think you just got to be patient. And I think when you're talking about learning from others, and I think it's Richard Branson that says that, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a fan of Richard Branson. He says that if you are the smartest person in the room, you are in the wrong room, right? So I mean, he always poses to try and be the person who doesn't know very much, because that's the only way you're going to learn. So I absolutely take that sort of mindset in every room that I go to, because oftentimes I feel like I am the student.
So seeing you as a person, I would think that one, I think you're probably a pretty ideal ideal fitting for that role, for transitioning, for bringing the human element and considerations of the human element into all these technicalities of a project, which is a lot about new technology, a lot about scheduling, getting things done on time, getting functionalities in, software versions, configuration management, so all these technical things, but then having the transition and say, oh, wait a minute, now we have people here like human beings who need to live with that day by day by day, and they haven't got the history of the last seven years or so of developing that project. So they need to be brought up to speed. They need to phase into this project, which is now becoming a future part of the operations in Melbourne. So I think that human element, this familiarization of people who weren't familiar with that project before, is a main thing. It's a big task, I think.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, the other aspect is really the how integrated a project is. Like if we think of something that's quite technical, it's not just sitting software updates, for example, for drivers to actually sign off. Like, we're implementing a whole new system. That's just one aspect of it, but it actually impacts operations, it impacts people in infrastructure, it impacts different people. If you've got a delay of a small component of a project that might impact our day one, are other people actually across the issue? And what does that actually mean for them? I think that's where the transition office plays a really big role, because we have an enterprise lens on every issue. It's not, looking at it in a silo sort of approach, but also understanding the impact on others. And I think the second aspect is really on how we manage change, because change is inevitable. Like, although we're transitioning for day one, we've got a timeline in place, curveballs are going to get thrown. Right. So how do we effectively manage change and bring everybody along the journey? Excuse the pun, but how do you actually do that effectively? Because everyone wants to feel like they want to know what's going on and how that actually impacts them. So that's another aspect of the role, really, of having the transition office.
Yeah. I mean, given my background and what I'm doing when I'm not podcasting, I'm very, very strong and active in the training world. And so I can't really help myself but asking a question related to training and what role training plays in this whole transition process. My view from the outside world is that the training activities in Melbourne with regards to my area of specialty, that high capacity signaling, CBTC stuff, has been a bit stop and go, a bit on and off, and very much not structured, definitely not structured across the entire organization. I had a few months back, I was in Melbourne, I had a discussion with the Metro Rail Academy, which is there for providing training courses. And I said, well, do you do any training on high capacity signaling? And said, yeah, we do that. But it's basically a familiarization of the train drivers, like how does the display change, or what is that new display that they have on their driver's desk, and how to work with that. So it's very much a quite narrow on-the-job training of users that are directly impacted by that new technology. But when it comes to a wider and more general understanding of what high capacity signaling, what CBTC is, and what it can do, it seems that there's a bit of training here, and then there's nothing for a year, and then somebody else in the organization says, hey, we need training. So do you see a bit more structure, a bit more of a planned concept coming into this, as close as you get to day one?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to talk to the detail of it, Jock, but I from where I'm actually sitting, there's definitely a very robust training plan in place, and that will form part of our trial operations and maintenance schedule that we do next year as well. So yeah, it's very intensive. I just don't think you can actually have the do what you think is good and then drop off for a period of time and then pick it up later. You definitely need the continuity. Familiarization is one aspect of it, but people also need to be able to test it and know that it actually works. So that's all been modeled into our program.
Okay. Being conscious of the time, I've got other things to talk to you about, and I am so it's a bit of a shift, but it's still related to the rail industry because obviously you're working in the rail industry. So all the stuff we're talking about now, from a listener's perspective, should also be brought into perspective with the rail industry. But after all, we are all human beings working in the rail industry, so you've got to look at the human aspect as well. I have a quote here. My existence has made the world a better place, which is a quote from your LinkedIn profile, and it explains the why, so your motivation of doing things. Now, if you look at this quote in isolation, some people may think it sounds a bit audacious, like what can you do as one person to make the world a better place, and how much of an impact can one person actually have. So how do you interpret this, and how do you keep yourself accountable to make sure that you're living up to that, like making the world a better place?
Oh, I love that question. It's not something I've actually had spent too much time thinking about in my younger years, but definitely in the last few years, it's definitely a question that keeps popping up again. Around purpose, 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 purpose. We talk about that in every organization. That's great. That's lived on. Talks about purpose. If they say you need to have purpose or vision, otherwise you don't really know what you're working towards. I think for me, and I think everyone's probably got a different definition of what success actually means to them. Some people might be material, some people might be experiences. It could be anything, and it's each to their own. But I think when I did a little bit of soul searching, I kept thinking about how can I create a dent? How can I create a dent in the universe in my own way? I think it's not so much about literally creating a dent. It's actually about making an impact in my own sort of circle of influence. I think it starts with my own family. I've got 2 young girls. For them, I want them to actually know that you could be a corporate professional, in STEM, and I know there's been a lot of talk about more women being in that sort of space as well. And it's a conversation that needs to still be had. And it's really interesting when you have conversations with little kids. And I spoke to my children and I said, oh, have you ever considered that there's a job that men can do that women can't do? And they say to me, no, like, what's the difference? So it's really interesting, like kids these days going through the schooling, like they're oblivious to the gender question. That gives me hope. Like, with our kids sort of growing up in this world, that they think that they can do anything that they put their mind to. I think answering your question back, I think it's about what impact can I actually create in my own circle of influence. So it starts with my family, knowing that mom can actually be a corporate professional. That's one aspect of being an engineer. But the other aspect is, could she do other things? Like, do you only need to do the one thing, right? And again, like everyone's got, different things that are important for them. But for me, it's creating influence. And it's very much like the work that you do at the moment, Dr. Frank. Like, with you having a podcast, it's influencing. It's inspiring people to think outside the box. Right. And would that be right? And I know this podcast, you asking me a question, but I thought I asked you a question, right? Would you say, with you running a podcast, like, what would you say is your motivation to be doing that?
Well, I like the part of your answer where you said you should strive, or you want to strive at improving your area of influence. So I think people struggle when they make it too bombastic, when they think changing the world has to mean you find a cure for cancer, or you secure world peace in the Middle East or something like that. And then you say, oh, that's too big for me, I can't do that. And then they drop it altogether. Rather than saying, okay, well, how is what I'm doing affecting people in my immediate environment for the better? So that's probably the thing. And since you asked about the podcast, certainly one of the the motivations for the podcast was to provide people who like to listen to podcasts or watch podcasts on YouTube with something that relates to their industry, to the railway industry. If they tend to work in the railway industry, they can have, I don't know, millions of podcasts about self-development and psychology and marketing and all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to the industry they're working in, it's pretty much of a wasteland. Yeah, we are fortunate, I think, here in Australia that we have another podcast that started about 6-7 months ahead of mine, which is Ryman Sheikh's Railway Transportation Systems podcast. There's a little plug for that one because it's pretty good. And I used that other podcast as a kick in the butt to start my own, which I planned for years to do and never quite got around to it. So clearly, by choosing the topics, by choosing the guests, by steering the conversation to an extent, I try to provide value to others in the industry in the hope that they learn something for their own work, for their own life, and that things are improving. I mean, I don't really think I could do that, or it would be possible to do that without, at least for me, without that consideration. Yeah, what the impact would be, and that the impact should be a positive one. If I thought this podcast would have no influence whatsoever on listeners, why doing it then?
Why bother?
Yeah. And I mean, there may be other considerations. I mean, some YouTubers try to get rich through advertising, and I can assure everyone that's not the case here, because I'm far away from numbers that would give me any advertising interest from YouTube. So I'm definitely not doing this with the idea to get rich through podcasting. So I'm not a Tim Ferriss. I'm not a Joe Rogan. I'm very, 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 very far away from that, and I have no idea. I'll probably never get there in the first place. So the motivation needs to be a different one.
Yeah, and typically it's actually quite intrinsic for most people as well, right? Because the extrinsic motivation only lasts for a period of time. I think for me, it's just the fact that, be a corporate career woman, but you could be an entrepreneur, you could be a not-for-profit founder, you could be a speaker, you could be an author, you could do literally anything that you set your mind to. And I think it's just continually showing up every single day. It's okay to fall. As long as I just keep waking up after I fall, to actually prove to my kids that it's possible to do more than one thing, and you don't need to do what society kind of expects you to do.
We come to that more than one thing aspect in just a moment, but since you just mentioned the word mind, I found a term in your profile again, which I have a certain guess what it means, but I wanted to have your take on it. Mind engineering, what is that to you?
I feel that we engineered for success. As human beings, we're engineered for success, but we're programmed for failure. The reason I say that, and so when you think about that, right, like, the way that we're actually built, we're engineered for success, right? People could think like, we're the smartest species on earth. So surely we'll be able to actually do anything that we set our mind on, but couldn't be further from the truth, because from the time that you're young, your mind is actually conditioned to think negatively to keep you safe. And unfortunately, we've taken this programming with us until we're actually adults. And there's so much of work that needs to be done to re-engineer the mind, or more so so that we can programming for success. And that's what I actually mean by mind engineering. Like we talk about engineers love to work out how to solve problems, break everything apart, put them back together again. And it's really no different when it actually comes to our mind. And most people spend very little thinking about that, because we're all thinking about the next thing in front of us and how we solve problems and move on. But I think the number one real estate that we actually have is really the one that sits in our head, like our mind. And if we spend a little bit more time sort of thinking about how that is actually engineered, we can be a lot more, there's a lot more potential for us to do whatever that we set our mind on.
Yes, and what can be done to improve it? Yeah, that's true. I mean, mindset is definitely a very important thing, and I'm developing, or I have been developing a training course specifically on that, with a specific aspect of mindset, like how do you transition a railway from a conventional, like old style operation to the new world, what I call a high capacity mindset. How do you do that transition? What are the problems standing in the way, and so on? And I think if I look at people, if something doesn't go to plan, if they're not as successful as they wanted to be, or as they thought they can be, they normally do a lot of stuff in the outside world to improve their situation and improve their chances of success. I don't know. They buy themselves notebooks or a new gadget, or they download a new app that improves their, or is supposed to improve their productivity, or some help to improve their sleep because they're always tired during the day and stuff like, which is nice, but I think it doesn't address the problem between the ears. Yeah. So if people have a wrong mindset, if people have a negative view of themselves, if people have what Carol Dweck calls a fixed mindset, where they don't think they can learn new things, where they don't think they can improve anymore, maybe from a certain age, like I'm over 50, so let me alone with that new high capacity stuff and so on. That is actually a much bigger problem than whether you take an iPad or like a notepad for your notes, for your to-do list or something like that. So so yeah, with regards to that, a mind engineering or a mind reprogramming for in a more productive way, in a more conducive way to achieve objectives, that's certainly very, very, very important.
I think it was a book that I'm just finishing right now by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now. Have you heard of that book before?
Yes, I have, and I still haven't got myself to read it, because it's, well, some people find it difficult to read. Let's just leave it there.
But the reason I bring that up is because there was a sentence in that book that said, my perception of the world is a reflection of my consciousness, right? Because when we talk so much about the mind, it's actually being consciously aware, right? And sometimes we think like, find the next productivity hack so that we can squeeze in more time and get more efficiencies, all the external stuff. I was challenged when I read this book because it asked me to be in the present moment. That was my biggest challenge of reading that book, because it was continually giving me exercise to actually be here right now, Teeshal. Stop thinking about what happens in the next 5 minutes or what happened in the previous 5 minutes. Be here now. And I think as human beings, we are really challenged with trying to just be here now every single time. And I think if we can crack that code, I think life would make it so much more easier because then we either stop living in the past or stop living in the future.
Yeah. It's very easy in today's society to live somewhere else, and just having distracting thoughts like, I wonder how many views my last post on social media has got, or something like that. This thought alone is enough to distract you from what you're doing at the moment, let alone from how you are, what you're being in the moment. But I mean, work related, obviously, that being in the now translates back into focus, like focusing on what you're doing right now and not what you're going to have for lunch in an hour, or your meeting in the afternoon, or some other task, or what a certain person said to you on the train in the morning and something like that. So I think it's extremely important, and I believe if you can really internalize that concept of the power of now, you are head and shoulders ahead of most other people.
Strive for progression, I say. Not perfect, but just keep striving.
Yeah. quite quickly, you do a lot for women in the industry. You touched on this very, very briefly, but you have co-authored a book which is about migrant women,
Yeah,
which is called Undefeated. And you're
correct.
also doing you're working on an initiative by the name of Flourish Girl, which I understand is very much about resilience workshop for young girls during high school. Um, just tell us briefly what the idea of that is.
So I guess the first aspect of it, Undefeated was a book that was put together by over 60 migrant women all around Australia to actually share stories of overcoming to become. And you talk about this podcast is to inspire hope in people so that they learn something, they can apply something, and make their life that tad bit a little bit better. And that's what the book has designed to be as well. So it's a compilation of over 108 stories brought together of overcoming to become. The other aspect of Flourish Girl, so I run a not-for-profit called Grit Leadership, where we tackle gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we run sponsorship programs specifically for women so that we can change the dial and have more senior leaders on the table that are women. And we have pledged for all of our profits or surplus funds to go to a charity called Flourish Girl. And so Flourish Girl was founded by an amazing woman by the name of Ashani Dante. And she's a speech pathologist by profession, but was bullied as a kid. So although she went back into corporate to practice, she her calling was back in school to actually give back more to the girls. So when we connected through LinkedIn, very much like how we connected, Doc, our values really aligned, and that's how the relationship sort of grew. Complete stranger, and then became someone that I became quite close to. I think that's the power of having conversations with people. And so they do some amazing work. They've actually worked in over 100 schools in Victoria, and we run programs for year 8 to year 12 girls. So I don't run any of the programs myself. Shani's done an awesome job with Flourish Girl. So we've pledged our funds to go into her charity. So she works with the schools to actually help girls, empower girls to become women. There's a lot of baggage that's carried, as you know, we were talking about mind engineering before, right? Like from the time you're 5, you already have imprints in your mind, the conversation, your dad scolded you, could be an accident, could be a million things that actually happen in your life that imprints the person that you are today. And we spend a lot of our adulthood trying to actually release those baggage so that we can actually reach our full potential. So the aim of the program with the girls is so that they find themselves, understand what their value system is and their belief system so that they don't get influenced by the next shiny thing that somebody else is doing. And by doing that, we hope that we will actually help with mental health as well, with more women coming into the workforce, that they focus on their own well-being. That's the focus of Flourish Girl.
When I read about this, I couldn't quite help myself to say that we should probably have something like this for boys as well. Yeah, so
It
especially if it
exists.
comes
It does
to
exist.
it does exist. Okay, good. Well, that's very comforting then, because I think there's so much stuff going on in today's world, and that whole mess up around this gender thing is just one of many crazinesses that currently go on in the world. And my impression is that not just the girls but the boys as well need some kind of help for orientation in the world, to basically not be swept over by all the noise out there, but really finding their own role, or finding again their own role in the world, and as they grow up and enter the workforce, how they can leave their mark. Our time is almost up. Maybe a nice finishing sentence. You finish your emails, or the signature block in your email says with gratitude. Why?
Oh, not many people pick up on that, Doc. So thank you for noticing. Well, it's to remind myself to actually be grateful for every moment in my life. I think there's a lot of different books that I've actually read on productivity hacks. Like, as you're aware, I do so many different things outside of work as well. Like, how can I juggle all these different balls in the air? And it's really interesting in my search for being more productive. and doing better in my life continually, the one message that I keep coming up time and time again about is about the power of having gratitude. And they talk about the fact that people who actually have gratitude have a stronger mindset to actually deal with challenges that actually come their way. But they also try, and well, again, work in progress here for me. But it's trying to actually continually thank my blessings and all the good things that's actually happening in my life. So in any way that I can incorporate that in my daily life is what I choose to do. I think I wake up every morning just saying thank you, God, for another beautiful day, and kind of excited for what this day sort of brings. And I say the same sort of prayer before I go to bed at night. So I think it's every day trying to find ways and how do I bring more gratitude to my life. So a signature in my email is just another form.
Great, and very nice way to end this podcast. I think gratitude is extremely important. I agree with that. I could imagine that some people would see an email signature like this as a bit of woo-woo or esoteric or soft or weak or whatever. And I'm extremely pleased that despite that, you still made it into a management position in a tough railway organization like MTM. And I wish you all the best for keep up this human element in your work, in your daily life, in your impact to people around you. Thank you very much for having been on the podcast. It's been a blast again, and I dare say I already have thoughts in my mind what we could do and talk about next time.
Well, thank you so much, Doc, for the opportunity to be here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And to all the listeners, you know the drill. If you like the podcast, check out the other episodes, especially the previous one with Teeshal. And like it, subscribe it, tell a friend about it. Until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Teeshal Bal. And before you head off, I want to give you another special offer for the end of the year for another training course. At the beginning of the podcast, you heard an ad for the high capacity signaling blueprint. If you missed that, then just go back to the beginning of this podcast. The other training on offer is the high capacity railway mindset training. This is really cutting edge stuff. To my knowledge, I'm the only one in the world training on the topic of mindset in a railway environment, specifically for railways that are in the transitioning process from a conventional signaling and a conventional operation to a high capacity metro style service. What this training does, it's a program over 12 months, an entire year with monthly provision of training modules. Every training module every month consists of two main elements. One is called a transformation guide, which is almost like a coaching session that helps you getting into the best place for change, for personal development, for any new learning, for changes that come up in your business, specifically in the rail industry, obviously. And the other lesson of every module is examples of mindset shifts from an old and maybe outdated legacy mindset, that's how I call it, to a new and more suitable high capacity mindset, which you will need in the new railway environment of higher capacity operation. For every example, I will give you ideas why the old mindset may not be useful anymore or what the problem with it is, and also some tips how you can get from the old mindset to the new high capacity mindset. As I said, this training is unique in the world. You will not find anything like this anywhere else other than on docfranktraining.podia.com/mindset. And now you get a special end of the year discount of 23% if you're using the coupon code podcast23 at checkout. I repeat again, the
course website is docfranktraining.podia.com/mindset, and the checkout code for your end of year discount is podcast23. Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.